How much time do we have? 45 minutes. Huh? Vishal, when you ask the organizers how much time you have, out of courtesy they say, oh, you speak, say Swamiji, you have come from where? They don't actually mean it and they can't. So I always quote a very interesting incident which happened in Bangkok. In a lighter way, let us begin. I keep telling this every time. There's a conference of vice chancellors in Bangkok years ago. I had attended that conference. The Chancellor of Oxford University was present as a inaugurator, a very witty, extremely knowledgeable person. He began by saying the following. He said, I went to an international conference and asked the audience, how long should I speak? They said, sir, you're so knowledgeable and you've come all the way for our sake. Please do speak as long as you can, as long as you like, but we are leaving after half an hour. It's very interesting. So I always feel that one of the main tasks of a speaker is to keep the audience awake. When the climate is very hot outside, you have air conditioner, a beautiful hall, it's very easy to doze off. And keep people awake, attentive is one of the, and keep them happy. After the wonderful talk by Sri Sanyal, where he spoke about so many things in a seamless fashion without plans, just I'm tempted to quote Swami Vivekananda here. Once he was so irritated with Sister Nivedita and some other Westerners. You Westerners, plans, plans, plans. All the time planning. I never make plans. But plans evolve as I move along. This is exactly what he was trying to say. And there's a concept in science as well as in Vedanta philosophy, which is called self-renewal. There's a statement about the Atman, the eternal self within man in Vedanta, which is called Purana. Ajo nitya shashvatoyam purano nahanyate hanyamane sharire. This is a statement in the Bhagavad Gita. There Shankaracharya, the great commentator, says, Purana means Pura api Nava. Pura is ancient, Nava is new. Although it is eternal and ancient, it is ever new because it is continuously renewing itself. That is the power of nature. A simple example, when you come out in the morning and look at the sun rising, nobody feels the same sun. I've seen it so many times. Very beautiful moon coming out with this golden radiance. You don't say, oh, I have seen it before. It is never stale because it never becomes old. Because nature constantly renews itself, and therefore in dealing with nature and life itself, you have to constantly renew your own thinking, challenges, and the way you meet these challenges. Because life is a very complex mechanism, because it is the simplest. The simplest things appear to be complex, and we, so-called educated people, have the cleverness to make simple things complicated. That is called scholarship. Simple people are very simple. They understand simple things. There's a joke about a Christian theologian. He used to speak about the qualities of God. He wrote a huge book. The simplicity of God and the glory of God, the love of God. Simplicity of God is a huge book. A pious Christian woman came and said, is the simplicity of God so complex? There's an interesting joke with which I begin. Another joke. Swami Atmapriyananda ji, who was one of our revered vice presidents, told this story. A boy, when he started growing, he used to tear off all the papers that he could get hold on. The parents were terribly frightened. They kept the currency notes away from this boy. But he will not stop this. They went to all kinds of doctors in India and abroad. Finally, a gentleman came, "What is the problem with your child?" "Oh, we do not know. We have tried all kinds of treatments, but he keeps tearing off paper whenever he gets hold of some." They looked at the boy, but he looks very innocent. He is, but this habit, somehow he's picked it up somewhere, we don't know what to do. I said, "Can I talk to the boy for a moment, privately?" I said, "Please do." At the end of the 5-minute talk, the boy came out, completely was changed. Then they said, "Sir, you are God to us, what kind of magic you did?" He said, I told the boy, "Please don't tear paper, it is not good." He said, "Sir, nobody told me about this." Because we don't put simple message in a simple way so that people can grasp. Truth is very simple, but we make it complicated. And there's a statement by one of the scientists, one of the physicists, who said, you can exactly predict the orbit of the moon and this earth, say when the next solar eclipse will take place, but you can't predict the orbit of a common housefly or a mosquito. A mosquito is sitting there, the mirror mud from which I came, full of them, very intelligent fellows. You can't beat them so easily. The mosquito is sitting here, then you go and try to beat it, and then they'll go up and see, now what? Can you predict the orbit of a mosquito? Then he says, life introduces something which is unpredictable, which you can't really prophesy. And therefore, every movement of life have to be constantly watched, and all the rules you put have to be continuously monitored and rewritten. For Professor Mr. Sanyal, the rules book of the Ramakrishna Math which Swami Vivekananda composed is not even 20 pages. He wrote some simple rules. Later on, Swami Brahmananda and others, his successors, were requested by the monks, "Oh, we should have rules." They said, "Why do we need rules? Simple rules are good enough. Keep moving, keep living those rules, and keep evolving." That's it's very interesting. So I begin, as we normally do, with a peace chant, which is called the Shanti Mantra. These Shanti Mantras are universal chants which prefix and suffix every Upanishad. All of you know, Upanishads are called Vedanta, which occur at the end of the Vedas. End of the Veda is Anta, Veda Anta. And these Upanishads begin with the peace chant, Shanti Mantra, and end with the Shanti Mantra. The Shanti Mantra which I will now quote is from the Yajurveda, which talks about peace in this universe. The entire universe should be filled with peace, because it's the only thing which is woefully lacking in this world of science and technology. We have everything, but nobody has peace. People can't sleep in peace. So with that I begin. Om Yau Shantihi Antarikshagam Shantihi Prithvi Shantihi Apashantihi Oshadhaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishve Vedeva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Sarvam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Sama Shantiredi. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. May the heavens be filled with peace. May the earth be full of peace. May all the oceans be peaceful. May all the rivers flow peacefully. May all the vegetation in the environment be peaceful. May all the forces of nature be peaceful. May peace reign over the entire universe. May the universe be filled with peace. May that peace fill me also. Om, peace, peace, peace. I just want to share some thoughts about the ancient, it new, Pura Pinava, ideas about religion and spirituality vis-a-vis modern thoughts in this scientific and technological age. It was Swami Vivekananda is initiated this movement of bringing science and religion together. In one lecture in Jnana Yoga in 1896, he said, science and religion should meet and shake hands. Poetry and philosophy should become friends. This will be the religion of the future, and if we can work it out, it will be for all peoples and for all times. A very difficult task which Swami Vivekananda had before him was to interpret the ancient Indian wisdom, which was enshrined in Sanskrit, as you know, in the modern language, which was English at that time. And English is very poorly equipped to describe the inner life. English and German, before that, are extraordinarily developed languages as far as description of science and technology are concerned. Sanskrit, on the other hand, is very poorly equipped to describe terms of science and technology because its area, domain, was extremely different. But Sanskrit was well developed for describing the inner life, the mind, soul, consciousness, God, and so on. There's a word in English called mind. And any Sanskrit person will say, which mind are you talking about? Is it manas? Is it buddhi? Is it antakarana? Is it the dhi? Is it the prajna? Or is it the chitta? There are half a dozen words to describe the mind's subtler nuances. Later on, many other religions like Buddhism took it up, analyzed the mind, the inner life. Two great domains. The outer nature, which is so grand with the sun and the moon and the nebulae and the various stars, and the inner nature of the mind and consciousness. There, the West excelled, and the inner life, the East excelled. And Swami Vivekananda dreamt of a union or a fusion of the East and the West. The Western science and technology, exploration and investigation into the outer world, and the Indian and the Oriental exploration and investigation of the inner world of life and consciousness and the spirit and God. These are two fascinating fields, and usually we show parallels, and we always in India, because we have some kind of inferiority complex, because we have been subjugated for more than 1,000 years, we justify our ancient wisdom and says, this exactly was known to us long ago, and therefore we are not so poor in understanding as the Westerners would think us to be. We don't have to justify anything. We knew long ago that knowledge is one. Indivisibility of knowledge, akhandatva of jnana, was known to us long ago. Even now, when you go to higher realms of knowledge, the highest degree one think of is the Doctor of Philosophy. It's called PhD. Whether it is science, whether it is religion, whether it is philosophy, whether it is technology, whether it is engineering, you have only PhD. Why? Because knowledge is one, everything is encompassed in what is called the philosophy at that time, natural philosophy. And therefore, the ideas in the East and the West need not be shown to be parallel or even identical or even similar, but we can always see that how the same ideas which are core and seminal to science also occur in philosophy. Or some of ideas I wanted to show. Yeah. We can look at this one. The three principles, fundamental principles in modern science, and I'm going to show how these principles are common to modern science as well as philosophy, ancient Indian philosophy. The one is the classification principle. The second is the generalization principle. The third is the unification principle. The human mind has a great capacity to classify. Classification could be on several bases. How do you classify people, human beings? And doctors will say classify the body mass index according to the classify, according to the height, according to your genetic origin, your nationality, your color, your creed, your religion. There are so many different ways of classification. Classification is important because the human mind has a way of pigeonholing its ideas so that similar ideas can be put together and pigeonholed into a particular box to be drawn from later on. For example, in the computer you create several folders. In any office you create so many files of similar. In the library you have the classification systems in which you classify these books according to certain systems. So the classification principle is extremely important in science, as you know. I've tried to show some of them. The classification principle, of course I'm slightly biased towards physics, as you know, not because I'm particularly fond of physics as a subject, because I know very little about other subjects, much less about physics, which I have studied. The more and more you study a subject, you know less and less about it, because the vastness of the subject completely baffles you. So the classification principle, in physics you know, classification of the states of matter. You know what is matter? You say liquid, solid and gas, and the fourth state of matter you say is plasma, and then elementary particles. They discover so many small particles. So you classify these particles. You can classify the particles on the basis of their mass, on the basis of how they interact with other particles, and also on the basis of what is known as spin statistics. Every particle is an intrinsic spin, as you know, and it's a great discovery of Pauli, Wolfgang Pauli, that the spin and statistics are related. So I'm not going to give you a class on physics. So these are the various ways you classify these particles. And in chemistry, as you know, the most famous classification which everybody must have studied in school, whatever will be a subject later on, the periodic classification of elements. Mendeleev and Loser-Meyer. Loser-Meyer was also equally credited with that, but Mendeleev's every chemistry lab worth its name will have a huge board there, periodic classification. 92 elements were known at that time. Then Mendeleev came and said, we have to find out how elements can be classified. So classification has to be done on certain criteria. This is exactly what we do normally in life. What are the criteria? What are the parameters which you take for classifying these particles? Once again, the way the elements interact with other elements. Remember, the whole world is based on interaction. Life itself is an interaction. What is life? Of course, it's not defined. Life sciences do not know what is life. Material sciences do not know what is matter. If you ask a physicist, what is matter? In old books, in school we used to study, matter is something which occupies space. Perhaps most of you may remember, older people. Then you ask, what is space? Oh, space is something which is occupied by matter. You are round and round. This is known as the cyclic nature of knowledge itself. Swami Vivekananda pointed this out. Our knowledge is insufficient, not because some other criteria come and tell us it is insufficient, but because the knowledge itself proves its own insufficiency. The cyclic method in physics which go round and round, and you do not know exactly what is matter. There is one definition of matter which physics will not accept. It's a very valid definition. Matter is something which is known by consciousness. Some of you may please listen to me. I know you are interested in the Android and the pad. You can put it aside for a moment if you like, if you can. Matter is something which is known by consciousness. This is a very valid definition, because how do you know the table exists? How do you know the world exists? Does the table come and tell me I exist? The world doesn't come and tell me I exist, but I say the table exists here. I say the world exists. So I, a conscious principle, need to certify to the existence of matter. But physics will say we are not interested in consciousness, we are interested only in matter. Most interestingly, a physicist who is conscious is not interested in his own consciousness, but interested in something which consciousness studies. Now things are changing very much. People are asking, who is the person who is studying all this? So you need a criteria by which you classify life in a very simple language, apart from what the philosophers and the scientists say. Simply means this, as far as I could look at it this way. As soon as you are born, a child is born, it opens its eyes and encounters people, encounters things. It has to interact with the world outside. It's called Jagat. And this child is called a Jiva, a living being. This living being called the Jiva interacts with this outside, with this Jagat. The interaction between the Jiva and Jagat is what we call life. What is interaction? Interaction is action and reaction. You give something to the world and you take something from the Jagat. What do you give to the Jagat? As soon as you are born and move around, you have to work. You have to speak, you have to move around. It's called karma. Karma is something which the Jiva gives to Jagat. And what do you get back in return? Experience. When you do something into the world, you get experience. And experience results in knowledge. Swami Vivekananda said, our goal is not enjoyment, but knowledge through experience. Through a series of experiences we have knowledge. I should have done this way, I should not have done this. So you go on increasing your experience and codify them into a kind of knowledge. So only two things exist in your interaction, the Jiva and Jagat. One is karma, work, and the other is knowledge, which is jnana. That's why the Bhagavan Sri Krishna said in the Bhagavad Gita, in the beginning there are only two paths which I propounded, which is Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga. Lokesmin dividha prokta. The very beginning I have two paths. Jnana Yogena Sankhyanam, Karma Yogena Yoginam. One is the Jnana Yoga, which is the path of knowledge. The other is the Karma Yoga, which is the path of work. So interaction is what is the basis of how you classify particles, how you classify elements. So the periodic table said, as you remember the periodic law, how do the elements interact with other elements? There is a group, is religion, dharma is righteous conduct, dharma is nobility, dharma encompasses so many virtues. Dharma is a principle which should guide arthakama. That's why Bhagavan says in the Gita, Dharma viruddho bhuteshu kamosmi paratarshapha. I am that kama, I remain in all people as kama, which is not against dharma. Now what is dharma? It's also a very important thing to understand. Dharma comes from a dhatu called dhr. Dhr means to hold, dharana. Dhr dhatu means hold, and the modern word for this hold is sustain. Sustainability, everybody talks about it now, sustainable development goals of the UN and so on, sustainable agriculture, sustainable economy and so on. So sustainability is dharma, the principle of sustainability. And what is the principle of sustainability of this universe? We discovered long ago it is a principle of sacrifice. Every individual has to sacrifice his or her self-interest for the collective good. You can't infinitely go on possessing wealth at the cost of somebody else. Your freedom is good. You can have your freedom as much as you like, but your freedom ends when the other man's freedom is curtailed. You can't impinge upon somebody else's freedom because everybody has his or her own freedom to enjoy. The very interesting incident which happened in London. You know, the British are very fond, as they say, of filing court cases for everything. An aristocratic, arrogant British, he was taking his dog for a walk, whirling a stick. As he was whirling a stick and moving along, another gentleman was coming along, and the stick hit his nose. The big quarrel ensued. This person said, I have every right to walk with my stick and whirl my stick. I have the freedom for it. He said, I have the freedom to walk along. Big quarrel ensued. It resulted in the court case. And the judgment of the court was very interesting. You know, British are very humorous. They can laugh at themselves also. And beautiful, impeccable English also they use. One more example I remember of an ICS officer in the British days. He was a collector of a district, and a big riot ensued, and the sub-inspector who was in charge simply ran away from that place. He fled to that place out of fear. So the collector went and inspected the whole thing and wrote a report. The sub-inspector apparently thought that absence of body was any day better than presence of mind, and there is nobody to be found near the place of occurrence. So that is the British wit. So the judgment said, yes, you have the freedom to whirl your stick, but your freedom ends where the other man's nose begins. So this is a principle of dharma, sacrifice, and the classification is dharma, artha, kama, moksha, and the classification of pancha atma, annamaya, pranamaya, manomaya, vijnanamaya, anandamaya, the technical terms in the Taittiriya Upanishad. Your body, your personality is classified into 5. You have the physical body, the annamaya, then you have the vital body, the prana, which is the link between the consciousness and the material. Because prana is the vitality which you have, which is necessary to sustain you. Then you have the mind, which is the manomaya. Beyond that, you have the subtle mind, which is responsible for intuition. Lastly, the anandamaya, which is the infinite Brahman. Then you have the pancha kleshas in yoga. How many kinds of obstacles that a person has? They classified it again. Then you have Ashtanga Yoga, everybody knows, the 5 steps in yoga, the starting from, unfortunately now it has become, somebody funnily said, it has become Shashtanga Yoga, 2 limbs are gone. Yamaniyama asana pranayama pratyahara dharana dhyana samadhi. Yamaniyama, nobody bothers now, they start with asana. So these are again classification of the different varieties of hierarchy. Then samadhi has also been classified. I don't go into the details of that. Now you have the second principle in science as well as in religion and philosophy, which is the generalization principle. Swami Vivekananda described it elaborately. A particular is referred to the general. General is referred to the more general. More general is referred to the most general and the universal. Swamiji gives an example of the Newton's seeing a falling apple. When an apple fell, Newton did not think it to be an isolated phenomenon, but to be a part of a large, generalized, universal principle, which is called the principle of gravitation. Now, every incident in life that we come across can be thought of as a particular example of a generalized principle. This is how science has proceeded. Science always proceeds by asking, can you look at this particular phenomenon as a manifestation of a large, generalized, universal principle, rather than taking it to be an isolated phenomenon. So you go on generalizing until you get to the most general or universal. For example, discoveries of science and Vedanta. This is again related to the principle of analogy and symmetry. This is also a very important concept both in science as well as in religion and philosophy. Science has grown only through analogy and symmetry. Most of you will know the atomic structure, which was discovered first by Rutherford. The atomic structure in which the electrons are moving around the nucleus, most of you know this. Rutherford is confused how the electrons are behaving. First, the nucleus was found as a positive core, the concentrated positive core, and how is the negative charge distributed again around this? 2 things have to be kept in mind. One is the stability of the atom. Second is the electrical neutrality of the atom. Atom is electrically neutral. Positive and negative charges should balance and it should be stable. So he was trying so many models, it didn't work out. Finally, perhaps he was tired and looked out through the window, my guess. Then he saw the sun rising and said, now I know. The electrons are moving around the nucleus just like the planets around the sun. This one's once again based on a very fundamental idea which is common to science as well as philosophy and religion, which is the microcosm and the macrocosm are built up on the same plan. You talk about microeconomics and macroeconomics, everywhere there's a micro-macro. Micro is small, individual, and macro is huge, universal. And the Lord God, in His infinite wisdom, and if you don't like the word God, you can replace it by nature, control R. Nature has designed the whole universe in such a way that the microcosm and the macrocosm have the same rules and same plan. This is the fundamental belief, because scientists also believe in the aesthetics of nature. If anything is aesthetically offensive, the scientists believe that this can't really be true. One great example in the modern times is the string theory. All of you will perhaps know the superstring theory, which is trying to amalgamate the quantum, the smallest of the small, the microcosm on the one hand, and the gravitational force of the largest, the macro world. These two have still not been matched, unified, and scientists are still groping in dark to find out how these two can be matched because of the fundamental belief that nature is one unified whole and there can't be two different laws for the micro and the macro. Still we have no clue. So this is a very fundamental principle of symmetry and analogy. Just like I said, the micro-macro equation from which the atomic structure came out. Then in the spectral lines they found that how do you form spectral lines? Because the electrons are moving in various orbits. For one orbit, if it jumps to a different, then the energy is now sent out, h nu, and this forms a spectral line of the frequency nu. When they found fine structure of spectral lines, once again Rutherford looked at nature, what happens to the planets? The planets are not moving in circular orbits, as you know, but elliptical orbits. From there got the fine structure. Once again there is a problem, hyperfine structure of spectral lines. Then I said, what are the planets doing? They're not moving like that, they're spinning around themselves and then moving. Very complicated motion. Think of the earth moving around itself, spinning around itself, moving around the sun, with the moon spinning around itself, moving around the earth. As children, when we were taught this, we used to be terribly afraid, ask the teacher, sir, are we safe? Because the moon is spinning around itself and moving around the earth is spinning around itself, moving around the sun. Suppose they miss just a little and there will be a terrible clash. But nature doesn't miss. Nature is just infallible. It's immaculately infallible. So from there they got this. See, the whole knowledge process is from analogy, looking at the macrocosm and projecting it onto the microcosm. Projecting from the micro to the macro and back again from the macro and the micro has been the growth of knowledge and science as well as in religion and philosophy. Every individual is actually the cosmic. This is the basis of Vedanta, which is known as the Mahavakya, Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi, I am that infinite. That infinite and the absolute, which is called Brahman, is the same as the I, which is the micro-consciousness. Symmetry once again is manifested, all of you know, the electromagnetic induction of Faraday. Everybody has read it at the school level at least, although your subjects may be different later on. Faraday discovered this from a fantastic analogy, symmetry. Every charge-carrying wire behaves like a magnet. So the electricity can generate magnetism. It stands to reason that magnetism should also generate electricity. If it didn't, the nature is asymmetric. Asymmetric will make it not beautiful, and therefore it has to happen. Symmetry is related to beauty. This is also a very important formula, a principle of nature as well as a principle of philosophy and religion. Beauty comes from symmetry. You say, it's a beautiful face. What is the beauty about the face? There is an axis of symmetry and everything is placed exactly symmetrically. So I have a hand like this and this hand is like this. You'll say it's very ugly. I got this idea practically demonstrated when I was in Belur College there. And you know the boys and girls in Bengal are very artistic. They'll go on decorating, Saraswati Puja and Kali Puja and so on. So you know how they form the patterns? They don't know anything about the patterns. They take a big sheet of paper, fold it like this, and cut at random. When you open it, you have a beautiful pattern. How is the pattern formed? Because first they create the axis of symmetry. When the axis of symmetry is created, and exactly on the right and left there's the same, then you have beauty. That's why truth is called Satya and truth is also Sundaram. Satyam, Sundaram, that's what we say. So Faraday got this idea that when the change of magnetic flux, then electricity is induced. It's called electromagnetic induction. And when Faraday demonstrated this in the Royal Society of London, it proverbially stated that the premier at that time, Gladstone, said, "That's okay, Mr. Faraday. What is the practical utility of your discovery?" He is asking about electricity. The famous reply by Faraday, "Sir, it is just like asking what is the utility of your newborn baby. Please allow it to grow." A newborn baby is absolutely useless. This is one argument I always use against materialism. People say or talk about materialism against the religion and spirituality. I ask them, do you have a child? Yeah, I have a. People should be not rejoicing but feeling intensely unhappy when a child is born. They should not be distributing sweets to everybody because the child is going to be a huge liability for next 25 years. Draining out all the funds from the father's pocket. Why is the father so happy about a liability being born to him? If everybody were totally materialistic, this would not happen. That shows that human beings are fundamentally not materialistic. Matter is not everything. So this is the story of Faraday. And there is another principle called Invariance Principle in physics, in science in general, physics in particular, which is also an important principle in religion and spirituality. What is that? There is a constancy in life. Everything is changing, but there is something constant which doesn't change. All of you know with Einstein's theory of relativity, which is called relativity because Einstein said all the frames of reference are relative and the reality is seen through different frames of reference which are relative, and all the frames are on equal footing. Nature does not have any preferred frame of reference. Interesting aspect about the relativity theory is that it is not merely the theory of relativity, the first postulate. Second postulate says the velocity of light in vacuum is an absolute constant. It is invariant, doesn't change. Velocity of light in vacuum, 3 into 10 power 10 centimeters per second, 1,86,000 miles per second, for some strange reason, is an absolute constant. You can chase light. If you travel along a beam of light with half the velocity of the light, the velocity of light measured will still be the same. Suppose you are chasing a car, chasing a train. A train is going at velocity of 60 kilometers per hour. By the side, another train is going at 30 kilometers per hour. You will know from simple physics that from relative to that second train, the first train will appear to move at 30 kilometers, 60 minus 30. If in the opposite direction, it is 60 plus 30. Everybody knows this. But if you are moving along a ray of light, which is moving at 3 into 10 power 10 centimeters per second, or 1,86,000 miles per second, and you're traveling half that velocity, light beam will still show that it's traveling at the same speed. You don't know why. There are certain mysteries in science which you can't explain why. The velocity of light in vacuum is an absolute constant. There are certain constants in science which are very funny, and most interestingly, some of them are called irrational. Pi, you've heard of pi, and Ramanujan's famous discovery of the number of digits of pi. Pi, we normally say 22 by 7. It's a very crude way of putting it. And pi is something which is basic to physics, and pi, whenever it occurs, it reminds you of rotational motion. Whenever there's a rotation, you know the perimeter of a circle and so on, 2 pi r. So pi is related to the rotational motion, and the pi and e, the base of the logarithm, natural logarithms e. These are certain constants in mathematics and science which nature chose to be absolute constant. One more, which was added by Max Planck, the Planck's constant h. So the principle of invariance, and Neusser was a very famous female physicist, very few female physicists are available. Neusser discovered a very interesting law in which she said that invariance is related to symmetry. Symmetry, which leads to beauty, leads to constancy or invariance. That means Satyam, Sundaram is also constant or Shantam. Shantam is absolutely tranquil and constant. The Nityatva. So this is one important principle in life also, in Vedanta and consciousness, everyday life. Why do we need constancy in life? Everything is changing. There's a great debate between Buddha and Shankara. Buddha said everything is changing. Shankara said there is an unchanging element. What is basic in life? Change or constancy? Which is more fundamental? Vedanta says there is change, constant change, but there's a constancy which gives value to this change and meaning to this change. I'll give a very simple example. Suppose everything is changing, go back home and you find home is not there. What happened? It has moved away somewhere else. Constantly things are changing, people are changing, and if everything is constantly changing, life will have no meaning. Please stop me and contradict me if it is illogical. I am going to push you to Vedanta now, the end of Vedanta. If everything is constantly changing, life will have no meaning. Why? You put your fund of somebody, deposit in bank, and that bank collapses and you have nothing. Or put your faith in some friend and then he betrays you. Life will have no meaning if everything is changing and if there is no constancy at all in life. There's a joke about one Professor Wiener. Professor Wiener is a very great mathematician in the Harvard and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And as most of the mathematical professors are, was absolutely absent-minded. And he had to be constantly reminded about many things. So they had shifted homes, and his wife told him, Wiener, please don't drive back to the old home. We have changed homes. This is the new address. This is the telephone number. Keep it in your pocket. Very carefully kept it in his pocket. Wiener reaches his office. Suddenly a mathematical problem strikes him. Frantically looking for a piece of paper, takes it from his pocket, scribbles in the back, and doesn't work. Frustrated, throws it in the dustbin. As usual, he came back to his old home, only to remember that they have changed homes and his wife has given him the piece of paper on which the address is written, new address. He took it out, but the paper which he had was something totally different. Then he remembered, oh, thrown away that paper, it's gone. Then a bright idea struck him. Mathematicians. I hope there are mathematicians here, but we are not that absent-minded. These geniuses are, like Ramanujan used to talk to plants. Then he said, Wiener is a very famous person. Everybody knows Professor Wiener. I can ask somebody in the neighborhood. I've been staying here for a long time. A small girl was standing there. He went, dear, can you tell me where Professor Wiener has moved? The girl smiled and said, Dad, Mom kept me here so that she knew you will forget. That's not a joke. Later on, when she grew up, this girl was interviewed. She said, is it true? She blushed and said, Father was not that bad. But reasonably he was bad. So if everything is changing, there's no certainty in life. There's no certainty, there is no meaning in life. If you agree to that, I proceed to the next step. You may ask, what is there? Let there be no meaning. What happens if there is no meaning to life? Suppose you feel life has no meaning. I have no meaning which will make me live. Who is a person who becomes absolutely frustrated, attempts either suicide, becomes mad? He is a person who finds no meaning in life. Some of you must be exposed to the Frankel's book on the logotherapy, in which he found people who are being tortured in the concentration camps still would like to live, because they find some meaning in life. The seeking of the meaning in life is one of the most fundamental urges of the human mind. This has been asked in psychology. What is the most fundamental urge? Freud said it is pleasure motive, Adler said it is power motive, and so on. But Frankl said, Viktor Frankl, that seeking of meaning of life is a fundamental urge. Man, including woman of course, now it's very difficult to use the word man, it may be gender bias, they say. A human being is a meaning-seeking creature. So meaning will completely cease to be if everything is constantly changing. And if there is no meaning in life, if life is not worth living, life ceases to exist. And therefore there has to be a meaning. And in order to have a meaning, there should be something which is constant. Are we together up to this point? Then I'll push you further to Vedanta now. Now, if there is a changeless entity, assuming it is one, which we proved is necessary to be able to live in life, you ask, what is change? What is change? You had in your pocket a 1,000 currency note, rupee currency note, and I think on the 8th of November, or which year was that? 16. Which month, date? 9th of November, you suddenly found that that currency note has no meaning anymore. So time, change of time suddenly makes it meaningless. Or, it happened in my case, I did not have much of experience, I went abroad so many times later on. So from here I flew to Dubai, I had some currency notes in my pocket, rupees. I could not buy a cup of coffee, because nobody honors rupees elsewhere. Do you have dollars, you have euros, then you're through. So when you change places, meaning is lost. Change means change in time, change in place. Are we together in this? And therefore, anything which is changeless has to be beyond time and beyond space. If it is beyond time and beyond space, it has to be infinite. Why? Because if it is finite, this is the way science argues, it's called reductio ad absurdum. Reductio ad absurdum means take the opposite to be true, then go through the whole thing, and you find that you get an absurd answer, and therefore your original assumption was wrong. So reducing to an absurdity is a common process in mathematics and physics. If that which is changeless is finite, then it has to be infinite. Why? If it is finite, then it has to be conditioned by time and space, and only that which is infinite is unconditioned. Because it is beyond time and beyond space, if it is infinite, it has to be one. Why? Because as Swami Vivekananda beautifully said, there can't be two infinities. If there are two infinities, one infinity will limit the other, both will become finite. It has to be in one. If it is one, it has to be me. Why? Because if it is apart from me, there will be two, and therefore this has to be infinite. So that is Aham Brahmasmi Tattvamasi. Prigozhin is an Italian, order out of chaos, and he claims this can be applied to economics as well as social sciences. The second quest in the continuum of matter, life, mind and consciousness. Einstein's special theory of relativity talked about space-time continuum. Then general theory of relativity is generalized into space-time matter continuum. Long ago, Vedanta generalized it space-time matter consciousness continuum. The whole thing is one continuum, and there's no hiatus, there is no gap between these two. Where matter ends and where consciousness begins cannot be identified. Demarcation is not possible. And another important idea, which is now in the modern world, thanks to internet and so on, the interconnectedness, and therefore the interdependence. The peace that I am seeking can't be found by me here unless there is peace everywhere else. Nobody can live in isolation. The globalization has clearly proved I can't live a life unless everybody else is peacefully living their own lives. The global economy, for example. Why is this price of oil rising? Somewhere somebody is fighting, and therefore I am having this. The butterfly effect which Mr. Sanyal was referring, and the Max principle by which Einstein swore, if I raise a little finger here, I am disturbing a star out there. The whole thing is one homogeneous, connected piece of matter. Now, this principle of interconnectedness was largely discussed in Vedanta as well as in Buddhism. Some of you may know some Buddhistic, a very famous scientific Buddhistic idea of the Pratitya Samutpada. From every point to point to point, there is a continuous flow, and no object has its own substance or entity. An example is given. You take a piece of paper. What is the nature of a paper? The substance of a paper, nature of a paper is paperness. Suppose you put it that way, paperness. Paperatva. Now, if you analyze it a little more, where does it, on what does it depend? It depends on the tree from which it's produced. And how is it produced? By somebody else. Somebody cut the tree, somebody brought it. And there's a chain of causes behind this paper, on which the paperness of the paper depends. And therefore, because of the interdependence of the paperness of the paper and innumerable causes before that, the paperness itself is not an independent entity. It is no entity at all. Nisvabhava is the term used by Buddhism. The swabhava of the paper is completely lost in the whole range of causes. In a sense, therefore, the swabhava is empty because it includes everything which has gone to make that paper. The all-inclusiveness of this paper, to be able to present the paperness, makes it completely empty of its own paperness and isolation. It's a very important idea of interconnectedness in Buddhism, and therefore interdependence. So interdependence and interconnected in the social sciences immediately mean you can't live by yourself. This is the ancient Indian idea of the yajna. You go on sacrificing yourself. I talked about the dharma or the sacrifice. I have to constantly sacrifice. I should give myself up to be able to live peacefully with everybody else. This idea of interconnectedness is a very important philosophical as well as scientific idea. And the indivisibility of knowledge about which I spoke. Then the quest for the infinite. This is also a fundamental human urge. A human mind is not satisfied with that which is finite. The bhuma vayitat sukham na alpe sukham asti Chandogya, which I quoted here. You can't find sukha or joy in something which is finite. However much you may try, because that which is finite will change, and that which gave you joy today will cease to give you joy tomorrow. This happens in the world every time. And therefore, you go on chasing joy in the finite endlessly. That is the tantalus cup which will never satisfy your thirst. And therefore, the finite alone you will get joy. And the meaning of the infinite is found in the presence of the infinite. Which means every object in the universe, in a sense, is both finite as well as infinite. We talk about infinite. We vaguely understand its meaning. It means, of course, we have some idea of the infinite. If we were only finite, we would never be able to conceive of the infinite. That shows somewhere within us there is an entity which is infinite, and we are a peculiar, paradoxical combination of the finite and the infinite. Man, human beings will never cease to have the quest for the infinite, quest for the vast and challenging. I ask people, you say you should not take challenges, don't take risks, live a safe life. Why do people go for rock climbing and the Everest climbing and so on? A rat or a lizard can climb much faster rocks. So you're imitating a rat unsuccessfully. Why? Some people may even face death. They're risking their life, they're doing it because there's some quest within which wants to go higher and higher and explore. The spirit of exploration and investigation, as Tennyson said in his poem on Ulysses, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Man wants to explore continuously. Man, go to the depth of the ocean and go photograph. Many people have died there also. The quest for the infinite within the finite will never give you satisfaction. We've been searching for the infinite in the finite, but ultimately, unsuccessfully, the quest for the infinite, the Bhuma. Then the last quest is the quest for Shakti. We always see there's a tremendous power, energy which is flowing in nature. We call it nature, we call it Prakriti, we call it Maya, we call it Kali, Brahma Shakti and so on. So Shaktas believe the Shakti is running the entire universe. A very great philosophy, Shakta philosophy, which says it is the Shakti which is running everything, and every female person is an embodiment of the Shakti. That's why in India, female people are adored and worshipped as embodiment of Shakti, and the household also, the female people usually run the household. That's what I hear, because we have no experience of that. So Brahma Shakti is what is running the whole affairs of this universe as long as you are in the world. And Sri Ramakrishna's great genius was to say that what we call Brahman is the same as Shakti. Brahma Shakti Abhed. When it is inactive, you call it Brahman. When it is fully active, you call it Shakti. So I end with two quotations by Einstein. He says, my religion consists of a humble adoration of an illimitable intelligence which our dull faculties can comprehend under the most primitive forms. And the very famous quotation, the most profound and the most sublime emotion one can feel is the sensation of the mystical. That is truly the source of all science. A person who is a stranger to this emotion, who can no longer wonder and stand in rapt awe, is as good as dead. To know that what is impenetrable really exists, manifesting itself with the highest good and the most radiant beauty, which our dull faculties can comprehend in the most primitive form, this knowledge, realization constitutes true spirituality. This cosmic, religious and mystical feeling, consciousness, is the noblest mainspring of all scientific research. Thank you.
Naresh, IRITM professional.
Yeah.
Sir, as you said that we are living in surrounded by digital gadgets and IT world and ever evolving knowledge. As we see in last 2 hours, we are getting more knowledge. Then can we say is scientific knowledge better than other kind of knowledge?
What do you mean better? You have see, the field in science and Life itself, you have to define every word. What do you mean better?
Better means what is more important.
What is important, what is unimportant is defined as relative.
Yes, sir. As
So
you said,
somebody may be very happy without any possession,
Yes.
as we have. Somebody may be very happy with more possessions. So better, important, these are relative terms. If you feel you are happy, please go ahead. But a time will come that you may have to cry for swearing only by matter.
Yes, sir.
So you have to ask certain fundamental questions. That's how knowledge grows. So human beings have to ask certain fundamental questions. You can't. The point comes in, ask where we come from, where do we go, what is the meaning of life. If these questions were not asked, science would not have progressed and religion would not have progressed. So always these questions are continuously being asked, and the growth of science, as I pointed out, has come from certain fundamental principles which are common to both science as well as religion. So you first decide what is better and what is important for you.
Yes.
Go ahead with that. See, we have no problem with anybody pursuing anything as long as you get lasting happiness and lasting peace. Everybody is with you, but it has been proved lasting peace and lasting joy cannot be attained as long as you chase the finite and changing.
Thank you.
We have one more question.
Good evening, sir.
Yes.
I'm Nikhil Khare, IRTS probationer. Sir, sometimes we see that people's beliefs are at variance with their own logical faculties of mind. So, and there's this constant tussle between the heart and the brain that goes on. So, is there a way to resolve it?
Once again, you have to define what is a logical faculty. What is logical for you may be illogical for me. See, you define the logic according to your own fancy. And even assuming that you have impeccable logic, have you heard of one Gödel's theorem? Very famous theorem. Bertrand Russell and Whitehead, please sit down. Bertrand Russell and Whitehead very carefully constructed the framework of mathematical logic. Please read the book by Roger Penrose. Roger Penrose, the Nobel laureate last year in physics. He wrote 3 books. One is the first book, Emperor's New Mind, which is caricaturing and criticizing the artificial intelligence, which claims strong AI, which claims that everything can be done by artificial intelligence in future. And in a debate he lost, open debate. He wrote another book, Shadows of Reality. And the third book, which has come out recently, a couple of years ago, which is called the Path to Reality. He came to Calcutta many times. So he shows there that Bertrand Russell and Whitehead's the whole structure of formalistic logic was simply smashed to smithereens by a young scientist called Gödel, G-O-D-E-L, some people pronounce it as Gödel or Gödel, in which he said there are certain fundamental truths which are neither provable nor disprovable within the system of the formalistic logic, but nevertheless they are true. It's a very interesting theorem. And he said, consistency and completeness cannot live together. If you have a consistent theory, it can't be complete. If it's a complete theory, it can't be consistent. Just like Mr. Sanyan was mentioning, so you ask for consistency every time. There can't be consistency in life. You continuously keep moving. Swami Vivekananda's famous repartee to a person. Swamiji has been accused by many people even now that you are not consistent. I think it was Voltaire who said, too much preoccupation with logical consistency is a hobgoblin of little minds. Small minds always look for consistency. Huge minds, vast minds, they find consistency everywhere because you can't look for consistency anywhere. Continuously you keep changing. Ultimate truth, which is absolute and constant, may not change. But when the truth comes through the prism of space, time and causation, continuously changes take place because space, time and causation change. And we are proud to say we are scientists and we are logical people, and therefore the beliefs that my wife has, my mother has, all of them are illogical, and there's a conflict takes place in the household also. When I was in Abu Dhabi, one gentleman came with a terrific problem. He said, I'm getting peaceless and unhappy at home. I don't believe in all the rituals my wife and my mother perform. They break coconuts and put kumkum, etc. And then ask me also to offer flowers. I don't want. Nothing is going to happen to all this. So I don't believe these things can bring anything, but they don't insist. They insist there's always a conflict. What should I do? Then I asked him, are you absolutely sure nothing is going to happen? Yes. Are you sure that they are useless? Nothing is going to happen? Yes. Then why don't you as well do it? Because you are sure nothing is going to happen. Whether you do it or not do it doesn't matter at all for you, but it matters much for your wife and children and your mother. Your old mother is so pious. So will you not satisfy her? For you there is no problem because you believe nothing is going to happen. When you are sure nothing is going to happen, your logical mind says that, you say, you can as well do it. I don't know. That means deep within we have some belief. And we want to show off as great rationalists. How far will your reason go? Your reason goes and stops at some point. Because if reason and logic were final, a judgment of the trial court would not be outturned by the higher court. There are wise people. And the same judge gets elevated to the high court and his own judgment he contradicts. And then they go to the revision bench, he says, they simply throws it out. Then everybody should be most logical. Why is it happening? Because logic ultimately has no basis. On the basis of certain things you argue out and come out with something. And therefore it is not belief. It is a deep conviction about certain things in life, which gives you satisfaction. You go with anything which gives you joy and satisfaction. During the Corona period, there was a huge criticism of a group of illiterate village women who were sitting in a temple and then clapping their hands and crying and praying to the Lord, "Oh Lord, save us from this." And all the rationalists, so-called scientists, they are all so superstitious, etc. Then I told them, are you happy with all the situation? You are intensely unhappy. These simple, illiterate, pious women sitting there and then crying to God and clapping and then doing bhajan, they feel some joy. Let them find joy in what they are doing. They are much better off than you. And you are writing huge books about this and constantly quarreling. And you will always see that one rationalist will never agree with another. Just like one doctor will not agree with another doctor. One teacher will never agree with another teacher. One lawyer will never agree with another lawyer because of intellect. Intellect always brings conflict. Logic always brings conflict. Rabindranath's famous statement, a mind which is all logic is a sword with all blade. It makes the hand bleed which uses it. A logical mind sticks at every point and does not move. You go on endlessly arguing, nothing is happening. People who don't argue, maybe simple faith, maybe whatever, they are feeling joy in what they are trying to do. Can the logical person say that? A person seeks joy and peace. If a person can find joy in worshipping a stone or a tree or an image, find joy and peace, why should you bother? I always ask people who criticize image worship of the Hindus, who are worshipping trees and stones.
जिज्ञासा को शांत करने के लिए